I'm Dr. Randel Raub, Director of Research and Nutrition for the Kent Nutrition Group, makers of Sentinel horse feed. I want to talk to you today about form of horse feed and why it's critically important, in my opinion. And primarily, we're going to look at an extruded particle, which is what the Sentinel horse feeds are, compared to typical horse feeds, which are pelleted product, and even textured feeds that contain pelleted products. The first thing I want to do is, I've got the same volume of pelleted and extruded feeds measured out, but not the same weight. And that's because extruded feeds are not nearly as dense as a pelleted feed. So a typical pound of pelleted feeds in a scoop is about this much volume, and a pound of extruded feed in a scoop would be about that much volume. So not nearly as dense, which means a pound of extruded feed is a greater volume. And that's a good thing. If I'm putting a pound of feed in a horse's feed tub or bucket that takes up a greater volume, that means it takes them longer to eat that pound of feed, and that's a good thing for digestive health. It also reduces the incidence and severity of choke, potentially. So the first thing I'm going to do now with these two equal volumes is I'm going to put water to just cover each of them, and we're going to let them sit for about 5 minutes. And we're going to show you why that's important a little bit later after that 5 minutes is up. So putting enough water in here just to cover both of them. Okay, and we're going to let those set for 5 minutes. In the meantime, I want to show you something between pelleted and extrusion that I think is important also. This is a pressure gauge. It's just a standard pressure gauge that you'd use for belt tensioning and stuff like that. It's spring loaded, and so when I push down, this little rubber gasket slides down and records the pounds of pressure. I'm going to do the pelleted feeds first. I'm just going to get over the top. I'm going to press straight down until this breaks or significantly deforms. So it started to flatten out just a little bit, but I maxed out my pressure at 35 pounds of pressure. And both these products, by the way, are senior type feeds. And interestingly enough, senior feeds oftentimes have a greater breaking strength than other. This is starting to break at one end, so I'm going to stop there. It started to flatten out at one end, and that was 28 pounds of pressure. Now let's take a look at the extruded particles. Do the same thing, just get right over the top of them. And that just kind of crumbles apart pretty easily. And that was 10 pounds of pressure. I'm going to do another extruded particle. And they kind of explode and disintegrate. And that was 11 pounds of pressure. So the question becomes, well, that's interesting. The extruded particles break under much less pressure than a pelleted particle. Because if this gets between the molars of a horse, you're going to destroy it, right? But if you watch how horses eat any type of feed, but especially pelleted feed, they go in, they bring some into their mouth, they're chewing it, moving it around, forming a bolus at the back of their throat, and swallowing, such that a large percentage of these pellets never see a molar and never get chewed up or smashed. That esophagus is really long in a horse, and the amount of pressure that's generated by smooth muscle tissue around that esophagus to drive food down that esophagus into the stomach is about 10 pounds of pressure. So theoretically, you could take an extruded particle and get a bunch of them dry at the base of that throat or esophagus, and theoretically that esophagus has enough tensile power to break those particles down and facilitate swallowing. It's not going to do that with pellets that won't break until you generate 25 to 35 pounds of pressure. Most pellets will break 25 to 35 pounds of pressure. Our extruded particles are always in that range of 10 to 13 pounds of pressure breaking dry. The other thing about extruded particles versus pelleted particles, extruded particles are ground about a third finer than most pelleted ingredients that go into pelleted feed. And so that finer grind produces a greater surface area, which enhances digestive efficiency. The other thing about extrusion is those ingredients are cooked for a longer temperature at a higher temperature, and that starts to gelatinize the starch and sugar fraction. It also starts to break down the protein into individual amino acids. So both of those then have enhanced digestive efficiency. So everything about extrusion points to a greater digestive efficiency. The smaller particle size, the cooking temperature, the larger volume per pound of feed that forces a horse to eat it more slowly, all points to a greater digestive efficiency, which means I can feed on average about 10% less of an extruded particle versus a pelleted form, given the ingredients are the same composition. If I can feed less of that concentrate portion, that means I'm leaving more room for the hay component of that horse's feed program, and that's always a good thing, okay? So, the other thing about extrusion, and we're going to show you this in the water demonstration here pretty shortly, and that softer type of pellet also has a greater water absorbing capacity, such that you greatly reduce the incidence and severity and possibility of choke. Even with horses that have a tendency to choke, oftentimes veterinarians will point to an extruded particle like ours to reduce that incidence and severity, because this is the #1 cause of feed-related choke in horses, a pelleted feed. And most veterinarians would agree with that. So I'm going to get ready for pulling these out, and we're going to do this pelleted particle first. And if you look at from the top of this spoon to here on this beaker, that's about the diameter of the esophagus of a horse. And this is glass, so not a lot of coefficient of drag on here. It should slide out pretty readily. We're going to do the typical Dairy Queen test here and get some of it out. And then you can see that I'm going to go in here, and you can see the deflection of that spoon a little bit to get this out of here. And this is representative of your typical type of choke, as these pellets get compacted in that esophagus. And you can see they get kind of fluffy, and they get to start to dissolve a little bit. But when you pick up one of these and wipe some of the fluff off, you'll find that there's still a solid pellet underneath all that fluffiness. And that's what causes that choke to get facilitated. When they kind of stick together, you still have that hard pellet that esophagus just can't crush and force down the esophagus. We'll look at the extruded particles now. Again, the same thing. And we'll reach in here with much less pressure. And you'll notice something different right away, and that is these come out about the same way they went in. They're not stuck together. They look almost like nothing's happened to them whatsoever with regard to getting fluffy or slimy on the outside. But if you were to pick one of these up and smash it between your fingers, you can see the water dripping out of there. It's just mush. Nothing, no hard particles in it whatsoever. And this is why oftentimes veterinarians will point to an extruded particle to really reduce the incidence and severity of choke. So enhanced digestive efficiency, a greater volume of feed per pound, virtually eliminating the risk of choke. If I had my way, every 50-pound bag of horse feed would be in an extruded form. I think it makes that much of a difference. So hope you enjoyed that.